evening. 2 weeks ago, the Idaho State Board of Education released a 67-page report dealing with the future direction of health education, engineering, and graduate programs at Idaho's colleges and universities. Almost immediately, that report, which was prepared by a team of outside consultants, became controversial. 2 recommendations in particular came under fire, both concerning existing programs at Idaho State University in Pocatello. Those programs, the financially strapped ISU pharmacy program and the school's nuclear engineering program. The consultants said in their report, in essence, that both of those programs would best be handled somewhere else. The reaction in Pocatello was predictable, the recommendation serving to reinforce the already firmly held conviction that Idaho State University has become the poor stepchild of the state's higher education system. Now, Idaho Reports has learned that a final section of this controversial review, a section potentially more important and even more controversial than the other recommendations, was deleted from the report that was made public early this month. The section deleted deals with how the state's colleges and universities are governed. It deals with the relationships between the State Board of Education and the university presidents. And again, it deals with Idaho State University, saying in essence it may have been a mistake for Idaho to create a full-service university in Pocatello. The deleted section also says the board's executive director, a job now held by Dr. Charles McQuillan, should be given more power in dealing with the university presidents and should be made equal in prestige to them. We've had various explanations as to why that final section of the report has been kept secret. That's something we'll be talking more about in a moment. But first tonight, producer Paula Whistle looks at how the part of the report that has been made public has been received around the state.
Page 72, and I'm going to read it. It appears that the number of Idahoans in southeast counties who wish to take advantage of public education are limited. Perhaps it was a mistake to provide a relatively full-service university to serve their needs, and this mentality permeates the entire report.
The sectional pressure won't go away. The political pressure won't go away. But I believe that's why the State Board had the consultants in the first place, recognizing that the pressures and the problems that caused the board to invite the consultants in the first place won't go away, and recognizing that they want some solutions to them. They ought to use the consultants' recommendations as much as they can, and to take the consultants' recommendations as seriously as they can.
They made a few assumptions. I wish they had told us.
What were the incorrect assumptions they made?
I wouldn't call them incorrect necessarily, but they made an extra assumption that these resources will probably not expand rapidly enough over the next 5 years. So they thought that there will be inadequate funding. If that is the case, then of course you have a problem.
You think they shouldn't have made that assumption?
Well, I don't think they should have made that assumption, and if they did, they should have let us know. We would have come prepared for that.
The reactions around the state seem to be directly tied to exactly what each region, university, or department stands to gain or lose as a result of the study. In the area of health sciences, the reviewers found that there does not appear to be a major problem with unnecessary duplication of these programs in the state, but that there will be duplication in the future if health programs in the planning stages now at Idaho State University and Boise State University are not coordinated. In the health sciences area, however, the overriding concern was the pharmacy school at ISU, and the reviewers said that should be the board's #1 priority. The ISU Pharmacy School, the state's only pharmacy school, is in danger of losing its accreditation unless an immediate $750,000 is put into the program. In probably the most far-reaching recommendation in the study, it is suggested that rather than put the money into the program, the board close ISU's pharmacy school and set up a cooperative arrangement with other states, similar to the way the state now educates its doctors and veterinarians. Neither pharmacists nor board members were enthusiastic about the proposal.
On this cooperative educational program, I don't think that we would be able to supply the manpower needs of pharmacy in Idaho by using other schools to produce them. I think we have about a 45 manpower demand now, and I think in his recommendation that he could figure out about 25. So I think we'd be in the long run, cost us more money than putting the money into the College of Pharmacy and getting it going now.
It seems to me that we would be acting, we ought to try all we could to save School of Pharmacy, since it is the emphasis area, and health education, Idaho State is. It's an integral part of our system, and by state law, they say it should be accredited, and we're going. I would imagine that we will do all in our power to keep it that way.
And there were other unpopular recommendations. In studying engineering programs in the state, the review team recommends that the University of Idaho, designated as the lead institution in engineering, should limit enrollments by raising admission standards in the electrical engineering and computer science programs in order to address qualitative deficiencies caused by overcrowding.
We have the only program in these popular areas in the state. If we limit enrollments, we're telling people who are qualified and interested that they have no recourse. The states around us are also filled to the capacity, and they are limiting enrollments to some degree. So what is a person supposed to do? I think that we need to put more funds into personnel to teach faculty here. The problem is primarily in the insufficient number of faculty.
In reviewing engineering programs at Idaho State University, the review team suggests that ISU give its first priority to achieving accreditation for its Bachelor of Science program in engineering, but that if funds can't be provided to do that, ISU may wish to consider phasing out the baccalaureate engineering program and converging it to a strong pre-engineering program with special ties to the University of Idaho. It is also recommended that Idaho State University drop its master's program in nuclear engineering because the University of Idaho offers a similar program just 50 miles away at the Idaho National Engineering Laboratory. Neither the U of I nor the ISU dean favor the recommendation.
This program, the general engineering as well as master's in nuclear, was initiated by and due to and with the efforts of INEL employees or AEC people those days, meant explicitly for their people and their purposes. For some reason, which I don't know, this was before I got here, they seem to have got disenchanted or something. They have gone to University of Idaho and asked for this extension of the courses. And there is no direct interaction between University of Idaho and INEL because they are about a day and a half away from Moscow or from Idaho Falls to Moscow.
Local legislators and other supporters of Idaho State University here in southeastern Idaho say the report actually justifies what has sometimes been called their Portneuf paranoia. Their fears are that while programs at Idaho State University are being reduced, the other higher education institutions in the state are growing.
You're paranoid if you have an unjustified fear. For example, if you answer in some of those psychological tests, if you answer, yes, I am being followed, that shows that you're paranoid. If in fact you are being, that's reality. I don't think we've been paranoid at all. I think we've been the lonely voices in the wilderness trying to get the attention of the State Board of Education and the governor to realize how unfair it has been for this area.
Certainly it's never been the board's attitude to demolish, do away with any programs at Idaho State. Our whole emphasis has been to try and upgrade and improve the quality of the programs that we now have.
The need for cooperation rather than competition between the various institutions in the state was a common theme throughout the report. The words turf, territory, and competition recur over and over. In the section on governance omitted from the final report, the review committee suggests that the board give greater responsibility to the executive officer, saying he should be equal in prestige to the university presidents.
You don't give an executive director power. I think an executive director owns or earns power by solving problems that can't be solved as effectively any other way. And I think that on occasion there are numerous problems that need to be solved that way, that need to be solved centrally.
Very frankly, as you know, and I am probably the one person on the board that has strongly opted for a chancellorship in this state, and I think that's the route that needs to go.
I don't think we need to increase the power of the director. The director works very closely with the board, and the board has all authority by statute and by policy, so I don't think that is necessary. But I think it's necessary that we have a larger staff.
I think that we need to, in Idaho, get away from the, we still have a lot of this sectionalism that has existed for years because they were individual institutions and they're jealous about preserving their own character, their own programs, etc. But even under a strongly centralized system, which I would favor, I don't think that you aren't going to lose the character of your institutions. That's not true in the University of California, which in their university system has 19 campuses, and in their college section, I don't know how many they've got.
As I mentioned earlier, we've received several explanations about why the section on governance in that report was deleted from the final public report, a report that, by the way, cost the state over $42,000 to prepare. In general, the consensus seems to be that the section was cut to please those with whom it deals most, the university presidents.
I guess the main reason it wasn't made a part of the final report, we asked them to specifically go into graduate programs, engineering, and health science. Now, as far as each one of those three areas, if they talk about governance, which they did in some spots, I think that properly should be there. But since the board didn't assign governance, it was, we felt that it shouldn't go into the final public report.
I just think that to go into an evaluation study that lists three things, engineering, health, and graduate study, and then to have a section of equal significance on governance was a surprise. If they believe that any one of the three problems can be solved by governance adjustments, then that is their responsibility. An overall review that says BSU or ISU or the U of I or Lewis Clark together ought to operate in a system that resembles that in the state where the consultants came from was not something that we anticipated was going to be part of that.
More on all of this now with one of the few members of the Idaho State Board of Education who is willing to be on this program tonight and talk about it. Mike Mitchell is a board member from Lewiston. Mr. Mitchell is also a former member of the Idaho State Senate. Mr. Mitchell, you paid $42,000 for the work that went into this document, and you didn't release the last fifth of it. Why not?
Well, when you say I didn't release it, that's not correct.
The board did not release it.
The board didn't release it, but it wasn't one of the three issues that was basically asked for from the consultant. I believe that it was a surprise. It was a surprise to me when it arrived in the detail that it did. I guess it all would have been more properly handled, Mark, if the report had been reviewed by the board, the final report. We'd accepted it in September, and then the press and the board would have discussed, rather than the way it is now, the report was out prior to the board members having an opportunity to even see it themselves. It's just been a comedy of errors that have created a lot of the problem that these people have just discussed. But I have no problem. That report on the governance should not have been in there to begin with.
It does raise some very controversial subjects, though, does it not?
Yes, and I don't have any problem with that. But the point is, it was a surprise, as President Kaiser pointed out. And what we don't need is a pre-released report that says many troublesome things, depending on what institution you're at, that also has a fourth portion that somehow gets into the hands of the media, and it will. There's no way you can stop it. That has created a lot more problem than this state board or our three universities and our one college need at this particular time.
So you're saying there was enough in the first 4/5 of the report to be controversial and to make people upset, enough meat that you didn't need the rest of it.
Well, we could even have justified all four of them if the board had received the report and decided that all four should be released, rather than have the media call me and say, what do you think of the report? And my response is, what report are you talking about, sir?
Let me ask you about what I said in introduction to that last little piece of videotape there, that it seemed to be the consensus that the presidents didn't want it released because it raises questions, frankly, about how they deal with the board and how they deal with the executive director, and that they basically got their way.
Well, if they got it, they didn't get it because they lobbied me to provide them with support for it. I just have to believe that the majority of the board expressed their individual opinions, and realizing that that was not one of the things we had been prepared to accept and digest, that it wait till such time that that comes out, which it would eventually, than when we had that time to digest it.
Even considering your comments about the section of the report dealing with governance, the report seems to be throughout, the implication is that the State Board of Education does not have enough control over these institutions. Fair statement?
I haven't been on the board long enough to know. I've enjoyed a good working relationship. I was assigned the responsibility at ISU, and when President Coulter was there, I had good access. I had no problems with him, but maybe coming on after a budget had been put together, which is really the nuts and bolts of the college-university system, how much money are they going to have, maybe I would have seen more of the problem. I have no problem with the presidents and the office staff, but I'm new.
Let me give you one quote out of the section that was not made public. It says, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, and then it says, the power deck, meaning the way, I guess, that the university presidents deal with the board and the executive director, that deck is stacked in favor of the university presidents. In your opinion, in your time on the board, is that true?
I can't see it stacked in favor of the presidents, and maybe it's because all that this study team did was look at what has been accomplished and what is operating. It isn't something that came on new the day they were here. So they saw a system established by presidents that worked under a different director, under a much different board, because we have 3 new members. Maybe they saw something that I'll eventually see, but I wasn't around to see it develop. Perhaps your other guest here in the studio might give some historical background that I can't.
Finally, let me ask you, Mr. Mitchell, you heard Representative McDermott. She represents a feeling that I think is fairly widespread in Pocatello, that ISU is getting the short end of the stick any way you slice it, not only in this report, but in the recent history of higher education. How do you answer that basic concern that a lot of folks have in southeastern Idaho?
Well, having been both places, in the legislature when it all started and now on the board where it's happening, a 4 or 5 year period of underfunding of what was recognized by past boards and the present boards as a need in colleges or universities by the legislature has created a problem that has fallen heavier on ISU. I believe that there were some things that could have been corrected at ISU. I talked with the former president about the communication problem. We have a new acting president. I am confident that gentleman, having been a part of administration, but also having been a part of the state board office at one time, knows what has to be done, and probably one of the stronger cases for ISU will be presented at this session of the legislature, at least I plan to, than has been presented for a couple of years.
Well, let's talk to that new acting president right now. Another view of all of this from Pocatello, from Dr. Cliff Trump. He is the acting president now of Idaho State University in Pocatello, where he joins us tonight. Dr. Trump, Representative McDermott obviously thinks there is a strong anti-ISU thread running through this report. Is that your feeling?
Well, Mark, it's getting more difficult to ignore that all the time. Since I've been acting president here, I've tried to take a little different approach to some of these problems and tried to react to some of these reports in a positive way. But when one reads the report and has ISU foremost in their mind, I suppose that you can reach that conclusion. I have worked at both ends of this educational system. As Mr. Mitchell pointed out, I've done my own consulting and I've done my own report writing, and I think most reports are written as a reaction to existing circumstances at the time, and I think that this report reflects the financial condition of the state of Idaho as it funds its higher education system.
Let me ask you specifically about the recommendation, the major recommendation concerning the pharmacy school. Can you respond to that in an effective way to tell the state board that that recommendation is wrong?
Well, I would like to say one thing before I say anything else, and that is we are asked, have been asked by the State Board of Education to respond to this report with an institutional response by September 4th. I do have responses back from the deans and from the academic vice president. I have not yet prepared our institutional response, but I can say at this early juncture that if we do not think pharmacy is the weakest program in the health sciences in the state of Idaho, as the report suggests, I think it might be the most vulnerable because of its funding problems. But we think a phase out to depend on states unknown and other legislatures in other states to take care of the educational needs of our students is not an acceptable solution.
Okay, we'll come back to that, I hope, but let me just ask you finally about this, this section about governance, and I'm assuming that you've seen it. Basically the relationship, the President's power versus the Board of Education's power. How do you assess that situation? Do the presidents have too much clout in trying to deal with that board?
Well, in my short time, I do not view it that way. The State Board of Education has categorically rejected the chancellor system through extensive studies of their own. Mr. Alford conducted a study several years ago when he was on the state board, and the board at that time concluded that it is not an acceptable solution or it's not suitable for Idaho because we believe that we need regional autonomy to interact with our communities in Idaho. I think I concur somewhat with Dr. Kaiser in that just because authority is not written down somewhere doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I think Dr. McQuillan is very influential.
The current executive director.
Yes, in working with the board and with the presidents. And in my short time working with the board and with Dr. McQuillan, I guess I don't see any out of balance power in any of those quarters. I constantly keep in my mind that the State Board of Education is the ultimate authority.
Right. We'll come back, sir. Thank you. Finally now, let's get the view of a former member of the State Board of Education who is about to become a member of the Idaho legislature. Janet Hay was for several years a board member from Nampa. She's running unopposed this year for the House of Representatives. Mrs. Hay, do you agree with what Dr. Trump just said about the relationships between the presidents and the board and not being out of balance one way or the other?
Well, I think I would strike a middle ground between what has been stated in the report and what Dr. Trump said. I do think that the office of the board needs to be strengthened. I think the position of the executive director needs to be strengthened. I tend to agree with Mr. Montgomery. I've always agreed that we should have a chancellor or a very, very strong commissioner or executive director. In the last analysis, especially in times of financial crisis when decisions are difficult to make in any case, you need a very strong manager or central director in order to really carry out the tough decisions and make the tough decisions.
If you can, in your experience, just give me one example of how it hasn't worked.
Of how it hasn't worked?
Yeah, how it hasn't worked and how what you propose would make it work better.
Well, there have been a number of reports generated over the last 10 years. This is not the first time that we have had consultants come in and give us recommendations on various programs in the state.
Right.
We had a report made several years ago on engineering, in fact. And there were questions about whether Idaho should have 2 engineering programs in a sparsely populated, somewhat underfunded state system. It is almost impossible to carry out this kind of recommendation when the executive director is not on the same par as the president's, or when he is, in some cases, looked upon as being kind of an errand boy for the president's. And it was the clear intent of the board when the job description was written for Charles McQuillan, or for the person who was to occupy that position, that that job was to be strengthened. This is not a new observation. You'll remember that when the report of the Task Force on Higher Education, which was sponsored by the business community in Idaho, came out, that one of the recommendations from that group was that this position should be strengthened and that person should be on a par or above the president's in the structure of the whole system.
Well, on that point, and we're rapidly running out of time, let me open it up here and go. Mike Mitchell, that's true, isn't it? I mean, fundamentally, there is not a lot new in this report that has not been said in one way or another before.
Yes, and
It's urgent now because of the pharmacy school, among other things.
Well, but if we had the time to go back and look at all of the little words that creep in, $750,000 is not necessary to save the pharmacy school. We believe, and the board has discussed this, but it didn't get out because this report didn't accompany any meeting, is that a phased-in, concentrated, guaranteed effort would satisfy the people that will be looking at accreditation, so that we wouldn't have to go to the legislature and say, come up with $750,000 now or else. The word emphasis is mentioned a little bit in the report, and then the word lead is mentioned, and that was a problem that the board tried to get around. But we'll solve this, but it would have been a lot better if the board could have accepted the report in September, and then the media treated the report and the presidents responded to it after a public discussion by the board.
What about Janet Hayes' point that the executive director needs to be strengthened regardless of how the report was handled?
Well, the job description, obviously, that Dr. McQuillan is following is doing just that. Dr. McQuillan is a person who has a style that lends itself to a person becoming stronger in the position they have. I have no fault. I may differ with his style somewhat, but the capability and the talent of the man is the one that the board needs at this particular time.
I might also add, Mark, that it's not just the stature of the position that counts, but it's the support people and the staff people who make it possible for that office to generate the kind of information and the kind of facts on which reasonable and logical decisions can be made. I don't want to imply that this person just hands down decisions off the top of his or her head without the supporting data. And that supporting data can only be generated by a very competent staff that has the time and the resources to do the thorough background work.
Last word from you, Dr. Trump. Do you want to disagree with that or agree? Or?
Well, I wanted to take you up in your offer to say anything that we thought had
go
been
ahead,
left
sir.
out, and I want to comment on the engineering recommendation because as long ago as 75, 76, when I worked for the board as the chief academic officer, I made a recommendation that Idaho State University get involved in the Master of Science in Engineering program at INEL. For the life of me, I cannot figure out why the University of Idaho is offering a program in Idaho Falls that they do not offer on their own campus. And I think that, if anything, the consultant's report casts some doubt on the rest of their recommendations because of this oversight.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt it. I'm afraid that we're going to not hear the last of this. We'll hear more of it, I'm sure. Dr. Trump, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it very much. Mrs. Hay and Mr. Mitchell, we thank you. That's our time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.